that was a long time ago, but it's interesting how that's relevant suddenly now, right?
So,
All
so
these,
let's so let's back up.
yeah, yeah.
All right, hey everybody, this is Eric. Eric Steele with Steel Wheels, Steel Media. I'm sitting here at home in isolation in beautiful Arvada, Colorado, with somebody I've been working with for a while, and a really good friend of mine. I'm with Kenji Haroutunian, and I worked with Kenji starting in 2008. We started working on Project OR together, and then we did an event called the Virtual Design Center. I helped him put that on. Kenji was the trade show director for the Outdoor Retailer Trade Show for 8 years, and he's also heading up the Big Gear Show, which is a new trade show that is launching or is slated to launch this summer. And boy, Kenji, it seems like, I just want to say full disclosure, we do work together. We have projects that we do outside of this together. But I think this is a really good opportunity for us to get together and talk about the state of the market and what these changes with the virus mean for group meetings and whatnot. So Kenji, can you tell us a little bit, for the people who don't know you, your background, real kind of elevator pitch about how you got into the outdoor industry, and then we can talk about what trade shows are about?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. Thanks, Eric, for the chance, and it's always great to chat with you. I grew up in Los Angeles, born and raised here where I am now. Actually, I'm in Culver City, which is a small town inside of the very large town of Los Angeles. And I started working at a shop when I was in college called Adventure 16, which is a specialty retail outdoor store that sold me my first pair of hiking boots when I was a kid, and was my favorite shop to go in. I ended up starting to work there while I was in school. And it was a brilliant revelation to me to start to work there, even though it was very low pay. I loved being in the environment where people were doing adventures, getting outside, traveling to mountain ranges and oceans abroad. And so I fell in love with being in the outdoor industry. And that was in the mid 80s. I started managing stores for them. I started teaching outdoor skills and became an Outward Bound instructor, as well as an AMGA accredited instructor for the Wilderness Outings program, which was owned and operated by Adventure 16. In 1999, I left to go work for the Outdoor Retailer Trade Show, which I had attended as a retailer in the past, both in Reno and in Salt Lake City. But I didn't really know what it meant to work for a trade show. It turns out it's a media job, and I was selling squares, advertising, and trade show floor space. And my very first show was the 1999 infamous tornado show that was in Salt Lake City, where an F2 plus tornado touched down in downtown Salt Lake, destroyed much of our show. And so that whole experience actually has been one I've been thinking about a lot lately as we kind of face this new version of disaster. But I do think that it's fortunate to be part of an industry that knows how to deal with adversity and knows how to think on its feet and stay calm in the storm, because we're definitely in one right now.
Well, I tell you, I never really thought a virus would do the things it's done to our economy. I never for a moment thought I'd see somebody pay somebody to take their oil. So yeah. These are definitely interesting times. What's unique though is that trade shows, if you could think of, there's no better way for a virus to spread than at a trade show. Like, people are coming in from all over the planet, meeting, and then going home again. And it's like, so obviously from here forward, what a trade show looks like and how it functions is going to be radically different, right? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. That is certainly the revelation. And in retrospect, I feel like slapping my forehead, except my hat would fall off. But, it's it's been on the radar of strategic planners for a long time, the idea of a pandemic and what kind of effect that would have. And in 20 plus years of being in the trade show industry, it never really occurred to me, even through the disaster planning exercises I've been through and the upgrades to
Can you talk about that for a second? The disaster
mhm.
planning. I mean, most people don't think about the fact that a corporation would proactively do these forecasting.
Yeah, good point. And it certainly was the tornado that jolted the company I worked for at that time, called Miller Freeman, into a heightened level of disaster planning, which at that time was more about phone trees and communications networks when the main communication network didn't work. So there was also evacuation scenarios and um, uh, decision-making protocol, decision-making hierarchy, and who's in charge of communicating to who. So in other words, who's going to talk to the media, who's going to be listening to the PR firm that's giving you advice about crisis communication. Like those are all relatively new, to my mind anyway, in 1999. But they certainly have come back to be front and center now, as every company in every industry is in crisis communication mode. And you can see the results of that in your social feed or in your email inbox every day. So yeah, they were very basic elements of disaster planning, and I think that since then we've come to think of it as more natural disasters in the form of hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, tornadoes, those kind of very specific to a geography and very relatively short in time. And so the idea of the effect the pandemic is having is very different than that. There's no geography to it. There is a question about how long this is going to be, and no one has the answers. There's no playbook, there's no rule book, and as we were talking about just before the call, there's just now starting to be a little bit of guidance about kind of the way that um, businesses reopen, the way that society reopens, and the timing and method that that's going to take. And it's not at all clear that this is born out of some deep well of experience. This is being made up as we go along.
Yeah, to be clear, just recently, as like about an hour ago, found out that major companies aren't even planning on having any large meetings. They're going to open, right? They're going to open very shortly, but they're
Mm-hmm.
not going to have any large gatherings over 50 people for at least the next 14 months.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so that presents a significant challenge too, because now here, you remember the whole thing with the Texas in Texas, how the textbooks in Texas, the 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 people who purchased textbooks in Texas, it was such a large market that they basically could dictate the textbooks that went to the other states, because nobody would do like 2 or 3 versions of textbooks for people.
Kind of like California and environmental regulations.
That's right, exactly. And so now with there being a lack of federal standards, um, and every state is really in it for themselves. You know, the Western states, California, Oregon, and Washington State, have all said that we're going to work in tandem about how, or work in unison, sorry, not tandem, unison about how they reopen and what policies they do. And so this idea that a company wouldn't open up for large gatherings until 2021, well, that's like the whole West Coast. That's not just large companies. That's large companies that just have the foresight to know these are the regs that are coming downstream. These are what's going to, this is the standards, or the guidelines that are going to be issued. And so they're already planning for it. And now that's not the case for Utah. That's not the case for Nevada, which are where the trade shows generally happen.
Mm.
So here's an interesting thing, is that there won't be a restriction in Nevada like there is in California to have trade shows, even like a restriction like there is in Denver to have any large gatherings of people. Basically all concerts in Denver are off for all this year. there's no cause. It's done. Um, uh, AG Live or whatever, they just canceled everything. So, but let's get back to the trade show and what's unique about the trade show, because trade shows are really important to markets. And maybe can you talk about that a little bit, about how trade shows make markets, or maybe, you know?
Yeah, I think there's two elements that come to my mind on that question, Eric. One is obviously the physical representation of a market to begin with. In other words, if you're at the trade show for a market, that means you're in that market. If you're not at the trade show of that market, you may still be in that market, but there's a question mark about it. You know, for example, Apple hasn't been at CES for many years. They're certainly part of the consumer electronics market, but they're Apple. If a small widget manufacturer that's new was not at CES, but they said they were in the consumer electronics market, you would say, oh, well, how are you in that market? Can I come visit you at CES? Are you going to be at some different show? Where do you come to life as a brand? Oh, well, I have a website. Well, my cousin has a website too, and she's 13, you know, and she has more followers than me. But you know, it's not. It's part of it is a legitimacy thing. You know, if you're there, and you're also, by being absent, you're conspicuous. So if you're not in that market, so these are just human judgments that get made, or historically have been made. The other piece of this is about new companies and innovation. And that is the engine that drives all markets, right? I mean, if there's nothing new coming into your industry, then how's your industry doing? Is kind of the obvious question. And so, and some shows happen every 2 years, and some shows happen multiple times per year, and that has to do with the pace and frequency of innovation in that industry. So what the trade shows do for innovation is they allow a relatively level playing field for new companies, new ideas, new discoveries, new partnerships, new collaborations, new products, and new categories to come into play at a relatively even cost structure. So if a company is building a widget for consumer electronics, they don't have the marketing firepower of an Apple or a Microsoft, but they can come to the trade show and have this chance to see the same buyers and tell their story in the same setting. Now, they may not have a six-figure booth, but that's okay, because their opportunity is still the same. So I think that's the important piece that drives markets, is innovation, and trade shows facilitate that in a way that's relatively equitable.
Excellent. It strikes me though, and we personally had an experience dealing with this, but it's interesting that that trade shows, like you said, it's not enough to just have an online presence. It's not enough to just have a brick and mortar store. You actually have to engage at the market with other people. And as the old adage goes, people is where business gets done. If you're not in front of somebody, the chance of you closing a deal and making a business relationship happen go way down. That really, these informal conversations, it's necessary to be in proximity to another person to have these things happen. We tried, right? You had me help you try and start a virtual design center. It was actually called the Virtual Design Center in 2011. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that was something that my CEO was very excited about, was very energetic about, and I saw an opportunity because of the particular situation at Outdoor Retailer, where we had just, and much, I will take the blame or the credit. I worked to clear the show floor of companies that were not in the business directly with retailers. They were providing ingredients to the brands, for example, Gore-Tex or fabrics or fibers or closures or zippers or buttons. Those kind of ingredient products were on the main show floor at one time, for a long time at Outdoor Retailer. And I had worked to push them off the main floor to create space for new and innovative companies doing business with retailers, which was my background. And also the name of the show, and also an important primary audience for the show. But by pushing them off the main floor, we still had space for them, but they were in meeting rooms and hallways that were not on the main floor. I felt like we needed to bring some attention and something creative to that group in order to keep that energy alive, because it was an important aspect of the industry. Certainly a lot of the sustainability innovations of the past 10 or 20 years have come from the supplier side or from the ingredient side of the market, and then incorporated into the finished goods and brought to retail. So we did we did both Project OR, the design competition, and in early 2011, we did the Virtual Design Center. And that was a treatment that created a virtual environment and invited buyers and interested designers into the environment, where we had virtual booth spaces, downloadable white papers and documents, webinar clusters where there was particular themes around education, and a networking platform that's not that different than what I read about just recently that's being launched to the industry this year. So I think what we were trying to do there was to address an underserved market, and that were designers and supplier brands at Outdoor Retailer. And to the degree that we, I think we were actually quite successful at drawing in several hundred designers who may or may not have actually attended the main show. And also we brought on about, if I remember right, maybe 20 to 30 brand partners to have their exhibits in that space. So it wasn't the full 100 plus that would normally be at an Outdoor Retailer show, but we had also narrowed it to really those that had a sustainability story. So it was a very narrow slice, what I would call a very compartmentalized risk for Outdoor Retailer. We didn't lose or gain much from it. It was an experiment, and it was more than anything a chance to put our flag out in the digital space and say, we are a virtual events company. We know how to do this, and we're going to keep learning and getting better and better at it. As it turns out, we only did it. It was one and done. By the time that we had staged it, the company had kind of pivoted on its own axis and decided it didn't want to do virtual events, and eliminated a lot of the team that supported that kind of product. So by the time it staged in 2011, there was no more team to support it for any other future events.
Yeah, I saw.
So it was a good learning experience, and it wasn't profitable, but I never promised the company it was going to be profitable. Anyway, what was your experience with it? You were part of that.
Well, I had a couple takeaways from it. One is it was the origination of the designation of designer as a badge, as an attendee. And so up until that point, designers had to attend under the name of a company.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the first time that designers could actually, just as designers with their own shingle, with their own brand, attend the show, which I thought that was really unique. And now, I mean, I think several thousand people at the last OR show used that designation to attend the show. So
yeah, you're right.
That's pretty impressive.
Not only did they have to be a designer for a company, but one that was exhibiting, because if they weren't exhibiting, they couldn't get an exhibitor badge. Then they were paying a premium to attend the show, which most designers don't really, make that kind of money.
My big takeaway from that whole thing, honestly, is that you got to be near people. You got to be able to look somebody in the eye when you're talking to them, and they got to see your smile. They got to see your face. They can't have a mask on your face. You've got to be able to have a conversation in the same room with somebody to really have resonance. I don't see another way around this.
Let me speak to that for a second, because part of my education as the reluctant trade show guy was to, and I'm still involved in attending events for the trade show industry. So there's a trade show for the trade show industry. It's called Expo with 2 exclamation points. And it happens every December, and it's the gathering of the trade show industry people that are working for companies like Emerald or Informa or Reed, but also destinations and event planners, wedding planners, movie shoot executives. I mean, it's a pretty broad swath of people that attend this show. Um, and one time I went, and there's a guy that I read his books pretty regularly. His name is Michio Kaku. He's a physicist, an astrophysicist, and he has a theory that's relevant to the trade show world, and it's called the caveman principle. And if you look up Michio Kaku and the caveman principle, you can read about it. It's pretty simple. It goes like this: if you want to know what people are going to do tomorrow, go back 10,000 years, see what they did then, and that's what they're going to do tomorrow. And it's kind of what you exactly said, is people are social creatures. We are not lone wolf type of mammals. Like, we are a social, networked, desirable type of animal. And so we like to sit around the fire and trade stories. We have to see people, and in order to trust them, we have to hear them speak and see them move and feel their vibe, and these kind of esoteric characteristics that are kind of hard to convey. But we are that animal, and the survival and thriving of trade shows is proof of that, at least up until this point. But I think that my experience, having been through multiple recessions, 9/11, like all kinds of very challenging aspects to the industry, the tornado, for example, I feel like, as much as there's a lot of commentary, and there certainly is, I think, an opportunity and a need for the trade shows to use this opportunity to change for the better, both environmentally, sustainability wise, and also in how we have leveraged technology. And so I think that the trade show is not going away anytime soon. The way it manifests, the social distancing, or I would call it physical distancing. I think social distancing is something a bit different. I think people very much have a need to still socialize. That's the evidence of these Zoom meetings and the popularity of video conferencing that you see now. It's not that people are just saying, oh, well, we can't have the meeting. They're just saying, well, let's do this Zoom thing. I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to try it, because that's how strong the human drive is to gather.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I can't do sarcasm on text. I mean, if I'm reading, I don't understand that. So, again, I'm interested. Like, okay, so basically, we are in agreement that the trade show is still going to go on, right? The show will still go on in some form or another. How about 3 takeaways of what you think is going to be the major change to the trade show industry going forward from
Well,
right now? Because we haven't figured out how to deal with this yet. Like, we don't even really understand how we catch this or how we give it to other people. We sort of do, but we're just playing around with that. Like, I don't think they've even isolated the virus yet. Like, that, I mean, again, I'm no scientist, but it sounds to me like there's a lot they're not sure of.
yeah. So I think that a couple of things and I've been voraciously consuming content from the world of the shows, events, also in the outdoor industry, because that's kind of what we can do now that we're stuck at home. Although I've been pretty ferociously planning for events as well that are going to stage at some form. But the 3 takeaways I would say are one, virtualization is here to stay. Like, back when we did it in 2010, 11, and then again in 13, 14 with the Outdoor Retailer Hub, it was a nice to have. There was a strategic reason to do it. Let's put our flag out there so that we can continue to develop products in that region, anticipating that at some point it's going to be relevant and important. So it was a predictive kind of approach. Now it's absolutely here, and show organizers who don't adopt it as a permanent part of their platform are, in my opinion, blowing it. So that's number one. Virtual is here to stay. How you manifest it, how you utilize it to promote, to stage and then to follow up on your event is where all the details are, and certainly the devil's in there about how good it is. But that's here to stay. The second thing is something that kind of came to my mind more recently, and that is that regional events are now not necessarily regional. Like you can have a regional event with a small grouping of attendees, but through technology and through applying this this magnifier and amplifier that we're doing right now to that regional event, it can easily become relevant nationwide, across the continent, and around the world. And so that's an important thing to think about, because I think generally we've thought bigger is better when it comes to trade shows. And that's kind of leads me to the third thing. And I would say that events that try to be all things to all people are doomed to failure, frankly, that people are going to pick and choose what they want to participate in very much on exactly how it resonates with their self and their future self as they see themselves moving forward. So it's not good enough, for example, to just have an outdoor industry event or a gathering. Outdoor industry, first of all, what even is the outdoor industry? Where does it stop? Where does it start? Is hunt and fish and motorized and biking, and are those part of it? You know, and so these are open questions, I think, but I believe that curated, focused events are going to be the future, even more so than I already thought. In the past 5 years that I've been running my own consultancy, that's been very much a discovery process for me, and something I've worked toward is developing and staging successful niche events, very focused, not just outdoor designers, for example, but maybe it would be outdoor designers of apparel that incorporate sustainable products for winter. Like that is a very, very focused slice of humanity. And I think those are going to be successful, and the technology will be used to make those stories become relevant to a much broader audience than might actually attend.
You're describing the fracturing of the Bell of Bell Labs and into all the baby bells. You're basically you're describing the breakup of the telephone industry. Like that, it doesn't make the telephone industry go away. It's just that everything goes off into its own area and focuses on its own little niche. And in the case of telephones, it was, location and region. You're talking about niche and focus, which is very interesting. And you actually brought up a few more questions for me to ask. One is that, okay, going forward then, how does a company that manages trade shows, that puts on events, make an argument for a lot more smaller events?
Well, I think that
the idea has always been to take advantage of scale, right? Like
it has been, mm-hmm. and I think that there has been a situation where, the focus of the shows, really all shows, if you go back into the 50s and 60s and 70s, has been to achieve an efficiency model, an efficiency mission, where you can go and get your business done in one place at one time and be really efficient with your time. Because before that, it was the traveling salesperson coming through one at a time, and this parade of buying opportunities or selling opportunities that was nonstop and very inefficient, because you'd end up spending multiple hours with each one, even the ones you don't do business with. But we left that. The ship has left that port many years ago. I would say 20 years ago plus, in that with the advent of the internet, there was not as much of a need to gather, to be at one place at one time to write orders, for example, or to see a line presentation. You still needed to see people and do business with humans and people you trust. And that became the focus of the shows is okay, I want to see the people that I'm doing business with. I want them to look me in the eye and tell me they're not going to sink me by going direct to consumer online, for example. The other reason, which has emerged as I would say the primary reason, is to have that discovery experience, is to go somewhere to visit somewhere where you're going to observe and take in the trends and the future of your own business. You can actually see it in real time, and you can start to imagine, um, well, gee, maybe a stand-up paddle offering does make sense for my ski shop, which closes every summer. But we have this beautiful lake right there that, and people are starting to do that, and nobody sells it in my, these are very specific examples, but you can see where I'm going with it. When you have a running component and a paddling component and a cycling component, you have all these elements. On the one hand, you have soup to nuts on activities, um, which it makes it really hard. And trust me, when I tell you, it's really hard to manage the needs of many different industry segments because they're very different geographically, time-wise. And so you're trying to create this one center for the needs of all the specific needs of all these different market segments. And that's a really difficult model. I think that that's super challenging. And so you can still, for example, integrate all those categories, but what if you just focused on one aspect of what they all do? You maybe focus on specialty retail only, or focus on the hard goods and the core elements of the shop, leaving the lifestyle, apparel, and footwear elements to a different show or a different time, because those are very different supply chains. They're very different buy-sell cycles, and it's a very different methodology used to go into that. So that would describe the big gear show, for example. The development of that event is at the same time hyper-focused, but sufficiently broad so that we bring in the value of a diverse set of businesses.
Interesting. You're also making the argument for events that are hybrid of a B2B and a B2C event that are specifically focused on one type of endeavor. Be it, solo, free soloing. That's not much market for that one, but I'm trying to think of a good example. But say like mountain biking, right? Like Sea Otter's a good example, but it kind of like it brings in all cycling to I'm thinking something more like, say, bouldering, right? And so you could have a bouldering comp, and that would have 75% of that event would be consumer facing, but there would also be another 25% of that event that would be business facing, where you could also make the argument that that's a trade show too. Now that would never really happen before, because these events were not where decisions were made. They were always like secondary to the decision process, because the decisions happened at these big national trade shows and they didn't happen downstream at these regional events.
Yeah, I think that the trade shows, you're right. They very much had a B2B. There were walls around that experience. In fact, they were thick and they were covered by blackout curtains, because historically when products were launched, you have to launch those in the year before they actually get to market, but you don't want your consumers to see them, because then they'll see next year's product and that immediately devalues this year's product. So there's a catch-22 there. Now though, what seems to be the case across markets is that consumers have insight. They have definitely the power when it comes to finding information about products and companies. They already know what's going on. And so the idea that you can wall off your next year's product until next year is almost a novel, no pun intended, novel consideration. I think that more and more, whether it's media or it's just you and I, sharing what we saw at the trade show, or maybe even live streaming from the event, saying, "Hey, look what I'm looking at. Next year's this or that."
Right.
And so that has become more normalized, and so it's less of an issue. And I think that's another piece that I'm trying to. And even we did, not with the virtual design center, but we did with the Outdoor Retailer Hub, is start to think about the consumer and how do they fit into this equation? How can we use the same assets and investment to pull the thread all the way from the consumer, all the way through the B2B, back to the brand, or the opposite direction, which is integrating the consumer's interest and feedback and excitement and passion from the beginning, and not having a separate platform for B2B and then a completely separate one. You think about websites, like a lot of brands, all brands have a forward-facing consumer website. How many have a distinct separate B2B website? Like that is a very expensive thing to try to maintain. And certainly sales reps are almost, they have more and more and more I see have their own websites. And those are most certainly B2B because sales reps work in the interface between the brand and the retailer. But more and more, they're having to market to the consumer. And that means they need a website and they need to keep that fresh and updated. And that's not that easy to do because it's a new investment. So the future trade show will most definitely integrate consumer elements into it in some way.
Well, this is really good food for thought. Let's see. I think that's. Do you have any thoughts you want to leave us with? I do. Outdoor retailer canceled this summer market. Haven't heard any word from the big gear show.
Yeah, we're busy recrafting. I think I can say with confidence there's going to be an event. What that event looks and feels like has a lot to do with a lot of variables that are not in our control, and some that are, but really what serves the industries and what the market needs right now, which is very different than it was even a month ago. So I would want to go back to one thing you mentioned about hybrid events, and because I think that's a really important way to think of this, is that every physical event in the future will have a virtual component to it, and I think that how that virtual component gets accessed will be a really interesting view into kind of the future of these B2B and B2 both gatherings. But I think that small events that have a big reach are relatively attractive, I think, from a business platform standpoint. If you're trying to develop a business platform, if you can do that by increasing your digital lever and keeping the actual physical meeting pretty tight, I think that's going to be important. And then the experiential piece is absolutely critical. I think that with, for example, the Big Gear Show, one of the things that will not go away, in fact, is being emphasized, is the demo aspect of getting in the gear, getting on the gear, and getting in the water and on the trail and in the mountains to actually test out the gear and get back into the game. And something I just like spilled out of my mouth this morning in another meeting was, the Big Gear Show may convert to the Get Back in Gear Show. So I think our industry needs that. We need a kickstart. We need something to get us out of our fog. And even if we don't have a particularly uber clear picture of what the future looks like business-wise, yeah, we know how to handle adversity. We know how to move into situations with unknown outcomes. That's called adventure. It's the business we're in. So I'm excited for this. I think that there's probably not a better industry sector to charge with leading us forward. So I'm excited to be part of that. So thanks for giving me a little platform to chat and inviting me into the Zoom call.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, Kenji. And maybe in a couple of weeks or in a month or so, when you guys have a more of a clear idea how you're going to approach July, get back with me and we could do another call.
Yeah, it'll be a couple of weeks, but probably not more than a month.
Okay, great. Hey, thanks a lot, Kenji. Really appreciate it. This is Eric with Steel Wheels, and just like to remind everybody, if you like what you saw, please subscribe, click the like button. It's really helpful for the analytics with YouTube. Thank you very much, and put out some more information here down the road. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Eric.
See you.